Hey everyone, welcome back to ASM Track Tips. My name is Tomo Gorman, and today we're talking about America's Formula One track, Circuit of the Americas. It's in Austin, Texas, 3.4 miles, so it's a long one, and 20 corners. There's a lot to figure out here at COTA, but it is a lot of fun and it's very iconic to drive, so let's jump into some tips. So here we have our track map of Circuit of the Americas, and you can see there's a lot going on, a lot of corners, and in general, I think of Circuit of the Americas as kind of two tracks in one. I would almost divide it directly down the center, all the way up to this hairpin. The first half of the lap, a lot of S's, all of the corners linked to one another, and this is the fun section to me. Then you get a little bit of a break down the back straight, and then you have a more point and shoot section where getting clean corners that don't necessarily influence one another is the key. Starting off our lap, keep in mind if you're doing time sessions, the start-finish line is actually way back here, close to turn 20. So a lot of the start-finish straight is actually on the beginning of the lap rather than the end of the lap. But the start-finish straight, very, very wide, coming uphill into turn one. And this is when people say, feels like you're driving at a wall. You're climbing 130 feet up towards turn one. And with that large elevation that starts right about here, you get gravity working to your favor, slowing the car down. So you can actually brake much later for turn one than you may think. But it is actually right at the exit where the elevation crests and starts to fall. So you have that elevation helping you all the way through the corner. You'll have the car set up all the way on the right coming up the hill. And there are a series of brake markers off on your right, as well as the pit outline that will help you as a reference to get your braking point right. Right about here is where you want to start your turn in, and this is going to be a very slow, gradual turn in. You have the most elevation up to about that point, and then you'll reach the first crest. That point is where you want the car about the center of the track, starting to turn down to the apex. And towards the apex, you actually gain camber as well. So you'll have elevation change and camber helping you have grip through turn one. As long as you don't overcharge turn one, you actually will have really good grip all the way until that track out crest. Now, the important part is not to hit the inside curb, as it is a very big curb. It will send both left side tires up in the air in certain cars. So you want to tuck up right next to it, but having gradually brought the car down to that apex, just up to the curb but not touching it, then you can feed your power up the rest of the elevation to the crest here, tracking all the way out to the right, using a little bit of the exit curb if you like, and then shooting back down almost that 130 feet again towards turn two. So now we're headed towards turn two, and turn two becomes more and more of an event the faster your car is, the faster and more horsepower you have. If you're in something 200 to 300 horsepower, no matter what it is, you can pretty much go flat through turn two, but the faster you go, the harder you have to set up for it. So kind of take into account what kind of car you're driving. If you need to get all the way over to the left in something, big, fast Corvette, Camaro, something like that, you'll get all the way to the left and straighten out turn two as you need to. In a slower car, you can probably just stay on the right side of the track and just get through turn two flat out, no problem. But the critical point is coming through turn two into the S's, because once you get to about the bridge here, exiting turn two, you don't get a break until turn 10. So turn two is a little bit of a pause, but be ready for it. So coming out of turn two is actually a little bit uphill towards the S's, which means there's not a great sight line until you've crossed underneath the bridge. So you kind of have to do some planning ahead and a little bit of muscle memory work here as you learn Circuit of the Americas. But right here is the pedestrian bridge where you're going to cross under. And the key point is to hustle the car over to the right as much as you can before that pedestrian bridge without overworking the car. And around the time that you get to that pedestrian bridge is the time to turn in to the left for turn three. So if you're adding too much drama in between turns two and three, try to settle the car down, and having the car balanced coming into the S's is the most important part, rather than carrying as much speed and placement through here as you can. Now, as I mentioned, turns 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 all influence each other, and it basically drives very similar to a slalom for any of my autocross friends or maybe downhill skiers out there. You really want to keep the car working and use the weight transfer to your advantage through this entire section, and it starts all the way back here at turn 3. Now you'll see in our in-car video there are yellow anti-cut curbs at the apex of every single one of these S's, and those almost act like the cones to your slalom. The key there is to backside those, and what I mean by that is rather than coming across the front of turn 3 aiming straight at turn 4, you actually want to come around the backside of turn 3 and aim off kind of towards where this number is, and get the car working early, and then aiming back towards the 5, aiming back towards the 6, etc. So we'll jump into that. As you come through the entry of turn 3, you're going to aim off. A decent reference point is actually a Jumbotron right about here. And you're going to keep turning left until you have to cross your hands back to backside turn 4, and once again for turn 5. If you're drawing straight lines from apex to apex to apex, you're underutilizing the weight transfer through this section of the S's, and you're not going to be nearly as set up for the S's as a driver that is doing that. Now at turn 5, we kind of change rhythm, and you're actually going to let the car throw it through turn 5 as fast as you can. And turn 6 is pretty much a double apex. The first anti-cut curb is right about here, and the second one, there isn't actually one there, but it's way over here, is your late apex for turn 6. So after coming through turn 5, you're going to throw the car in as hard as you can and let the car come all the way out to the right, up to that anti-cut curb. And then you're basically just cutting distance through the inside of turn 6 as much as you can to get set up to the right for turn 7. It's going to be an early apex here at the anti-cut curb, and then using all of the curb, all of the paint on the inside of the curb, even straddling that curb here through turn 6 to kind of cheat the distance and get all the way to the right for turn 7. One other thing about the S's to keep in mind is right here towards the exit of turn 5 is another pretty significant bump that has formed. As you cross the apex, you're going to feel the car go light and compress. And this is the section where you're going to throw the car through as much speed as possible. So you will feel the bump, and it may throw the car off to the right just a little bit more than you want it to. But as long as you know to account for it, it really doesn't upset too much about the flow of these S's. After you've gotten set up for turn 7, you kind of have two options here coming through turn 7, and your car is going to tell you which one will work better. The first option is to throw your speed through turn 7 as fast as possible, and you're going to basically end up all the way on the right side of the track here at turn 8. The second option is to sacrifice more speed here at turn 7, get the car over to the left, and be set up for turn 8. Now the first option tends to work better for a higher horsepower car that will want to keep its momentum up and then be able to accelerate hard off of turn 9. The other option, sacrificing turn 7 and setting up for turn 8, tends to work better for a car that's a little more momentum driven. So kind of consider what you're working with and try both options, but you do have choices here in turn 7 for how to set up to turn 8. The fixed rule though is getting all the way to the right on the exit of turn 8. You want to straddle all of this inside curb. If you can get both sets of tires inside that inside curb even, use that paint to your advantage that's on the right side there, straddling or getting inside of it to make turn 9 as straight as possible. So again, whatever you choose to do here in 7, whether it's parking it for turn 8 and accelerating off of 9 or setting up for 8 to carry your momentum through 9, you have to get all the way to the right here to straighten out turn 9 as much as possible once you get to the exit of turn 8. Coming into turn 9 now, you have a really aggressive rise, climbing maybe 10-20 feet here off the exit of the corner. And you can use a little bit of this runoff as well, but now you finally get a break through turn 10 towards turn 11, and this is a really long straightaway by scale of the rest of the track. So it's important to get a good runoff of turn 9, no matter what has happened back here. Make sure you get your runoff of 9 and maximize this straightaway. So you have a little bit of a break between turns 9 and 11 down this pretty important straightaway, but it is a not insignificant kink here at turn 10 that goes very downhill, and it's pretty blind until you get kind of through turn 10 into turn 11. So especially in a faster car, a little visual trick, if you're coming out of turn 9 while you're up at the top of the hill here, you can actually look all the way over to turn 9. There's a little bit of an advertising gantry here that you can see from back here. If you need to trick your eyes to get you to turn 11 efficiently, feel free to look over there. In a faster car, turn 10 can be a little bit hairy, but in most cars it's an easy flat, and you just have plenty of runoff over here as well if you need to use some of it before you get to your brakes for turn 11. So coming into turn 11, this track map actually has it to scale pretty well. It gets very wide on entry and then becomes a lot narrower on exit. And what that does is make you want to cheat the entry. It's going to make you want to turn in before you should. The critical point is to set up as far to the right as you can. You're going to brake somewhere around that gantry that I mentioned, somewhere around that green paint turning into the curb, and staying out there longer than you feel like you should so that you can actually wrap around the back side of turn 11 and get a good run on the longest straightaway. The exit of turn 11 will make or break your lap more than you realize because of it being onto this long straightaway. So again, be patient, making sure that you get your braking done early and clean and coming to a late turn in, late apex, and using as much of the exit curbing as you need as well to get the power down. If you start to cheat in for turn 11, or for my racing friends, if you start to dive bomb into 11, pay attention to how important it is that the turn 11 exit is narrow. In general, with how wide the track is coming into turn 11 here, you'll find a happy medium between turning in too late and early apexing to make sure that you kind of have both the entry speed and the exit speed down. But if in doubt, maximize your exit and maximize your run down this straightaway. So now you have this long back straightaway that is definitely the longest on the track, but because you're coming onto it so slow, the top speed's actually not that high by the time you get down to turn 12. But it is your brake to kind of reset from the first half of the track that we talked about being one personality, getting towards the second half of the track being a very different type of personality. So coming into turn 12 is what I call the stadium section, and you have this kind of arrhythmic section in front of all the grandstands where the Formula One fans get to watch. That is very challenging and kind of unique to any road course I've ever driven. But it starts all the way back here at turn 12. You're going to have the car all the way on the right, and there are a series of brake markers starting at 300, 250, 200, and so on. Down into turn number 12. Really, the only thing you can do here is make a mistake by diving in too deep. There's not a lot of nuance to turn 12 other than as you get your braking done, you're coming off the brake pedal, there is a little bit of a drop coming through the apex of turn 12. The car will kind of go downhill a little bit. And if you get the car to that downhill section with the front axle hooked up, it'll actually help you finish off the corner a little bit better and get a cleaner acceleration off the corner. So it's a great passing opportunity for racers. It's also a great spot for threshold braking, getting the car deep into the corner, but making sure you use that little bit of an elevation change there on exit to kind of hook the car through the corner. And you can use as much of this runoff as you need, but I think the happy spot is about two tires off the outside, 2 tires still on the track. So you're going to be straddling that exit curb. So having exited turn 12, now we're coming into a pair of corners that are almost inversions of each other. Turn 13 is an increasing radius opening up corner, and turn 15 is almost exactly the same thing, but decreasing radius, as you can see from this overhead map. So rewinding to turn 13, having come off of turn 12, get the car over to the left as early as possible. And coming into turn 13 is actually slightly uphill, so you get a little bit of that elevation to help rotate the car into the corner. And as you cross the apex right about here, most cars will tend to get just a little bit loose as you're trying to pick up the power. So pay attention to that elevation, but use it to your advantage. And here you pretty much don't want to work on braking super hard. You want to work on keeping the momentum up and flowing from the left side of the track across the apex into turn 13 and picking up that power nice and clean. Now you do have a couple of options between turns 13 and 15, but most cars should be able to kind of straight line across the apex of turn 14, across the apex of the entry to turn 15. And if you need a reference point off to the outside, right about here, there's another one of those jumbotrons that they would put the races on for the spectators. You can kind of drive the car right towards that, and as soon as you hit the brakes is when you would start to turn in for turn 15. So if you need to crank your head through the passenger window, looking up to where that jumbotron is over here, feel free. But you'll kind of feel that flow, and there's a really nice acceleration zone if you nail turn 13, powering off of 14 before you get into 15, which to me is the hardest corner on this entire track. It's, no matter what you do, kind of feels painful, but the wider you swing on entry, the later your apex can be and the better you're going to get off of turn 15. So if you're lapping by yourself, if you're in a qualifying circumstance, you can definitely swing way wide, get your right side tires almost out to the outside curbing here, and then as you release the brakes, the car will kind of happily tuck into a late apex here right up against the curbs as you exit off of 15. And again, you can pretty much straddle the exit curbing once you've tracked out to the right. In a wheel-to-wheel circumstance, this is a really tricky passing zone where people will be tempted to shove the car up the inside. So the only reason I would say to not run all the way to the outside is if you've got someone on your tail and you know they might be able to pass you there. So we're coming up to the end of the lap, but we still have 5 more corners to go. And the first one is a really long triple apex carousel, what they call turns 16, 17, and 18 up around the big tower, the big observation tower that's here in the middle. And this corner is tricky only in that it's so long you have to be looking through to the furthest point that you can all the way through it. Turn 16 is kind of a dummy apex. It just tricks you to turn in earlier. The important apex is turn 17 right here. And your goal is to kind of swing to the outside as much as your car needs to then turn in what feels a little bit later. You're going to turn in just before a bridge that crosses right here and get the car straddling the apex at turn 17 right up against a yellow anti-cut curb that's just inside the track here on your right. So ignore the apex at turn 16. The goal is the apex at turn 17. And the entry phase, once you've turned in before the bridge, is uphill up until about this point, right past turn 17. At that point, there's a break in the curb, and the curb starts again here for turn 18, and you want to basically follow the trajectory of that curb all the way through the end of the carousel. So you're basically coming down to a first apex at turn 17, and then keeping the car tight up until around the point that the curb ends here at turn 18. Faster cars with less downforce are going to want to float off to the left here, and that's okay to an extent, but in general, if you can keep the car tight and composed coming through the exit of turn 18, you're going to have more time to plan for turn 19. Lastly, there's a big bump that has formed right around the apex exit point of turn 18 that will really upset certain cars if you're in up tight against that inside curb. So you kind of want to have accounted for that. If you get a little bit of a bounce that sends you off to the left, just kind of have loose hands. It shouldn't loosen the car up or anything, but it can kind of change your lane a little bit if you hit that big bump. Now coming off the carousel, you have almost no time to hustle the car back to the right and get into turn 19. And in general, I would say turn 19 always feels slower than you want it to feel. It looks like when you're coming up to it that it's a really fast little kink, but as you can see from this overhead map, it's almost 90 degrees and it actually goes downhill into turn 20 as well. So it naturally pushes the car wide. If you ever watched a Formula One race, you know this is the biggest track limits point that they have to deal with, and you may too. So be ready to set up early for turn 19. While you can't run off into the runoff on the exit, you can use a ton of this inside space. So rather than trying to focus on speed through the apex and using the runoff, focus on cutting this apex as much as you can. There is a yellow anti-cut curb that's very shallow through here. If you can straddle it, get your left sides inside of it and your right sides outside, you've hit that apex really, really well. But rewinding to the entry, that means you have to get your braking done early, braking done lightly, and you're turning in earlier than may feel natural. Again, making sure you're cutting that apex rather than hitting the apex and running wide. So now it's just one corner to go, and it is one of the slowest corners on the entire track, which means to me, it's only an opportunity to throw away all the work you've done the rest of that lap. So turn 20, try to keep it simple. There's really nothing complicated about it other than it is slightly uphill on entry and levels out on exit. So cars will tend to have good grip on the way in and then start to lose grip, whether it's a front wheel drive car starting to push or a rear wheel drive car starting to oversteer coming onto the front straightaway. You really only have to worry about that little bit of elevation, setting up all the way to the right, down to a pretty standard apex and tracking off using again, straddling the exit curb if you like, but getting a clean exit onto this second long straightaway, starting your next lap, but also finishing the lap you were just on. So there's a full lap of Circuit of the Americas on our overhead map. Now let's jump on board a car and see how it looks. And this is a 2017 Honda Civic Si, so it's front wheel drive, very mildly track modified, but it is on essentially racing suspension, racing brakes, no aerodynamics, and racing slick tires. So we've got good grip, good flow, but it is a relatively low horsepower and slower car. So starting the lap off on the front straight, we have a long time to think about that uphill climb the slower your car is. But as you can see, it definitely looks like a wall coming at you. 133 feet up towards the apex, and you can see very significant climb here. Our braking point is on this extreme uphill, but here's that first crest that I talked about being a turn-in point down to the middle of the track, just up to the curb, and then tracking out, straddling the exit curb. Now these cars are slow enough that we don't need to set up very much for turn 2. You saw me about mid-track, then down to the apex, and now I'm going to work the car over to the right, turning in just before the pedestrian bridge and into the S's. Now if you note, I'm backsiding those curbs just a little bit more than the car in front, and look at me catch up. There's the big bump, and now our double apex through turn 6, up against the first anti-cut curb, and then straddling that apex at turn 6, really late around the corner before throwing it in for turn 7. Now we talked about our options here at turn 7. This particular car preferred to carry its momentum out of 7 into 8, so I set up a little bit more to the left and then able to straighten out turn 9 there for the exit. And here's the blind entry at turn 10. Get a little bit of a break here before our braking zone for the hairpin at turn 11. Most cars can brake somewhere around that WeatherTech gantry down into this curbing. You can see me hanging wide, trying to set up for a late apex, getting my power down, and I'm going to accelerate all the way out to the curb. Now this video is in a racing situation, so there was a little bit of tire conservation happening throughout, but now we get that brake down the back straightaway into the second personality of Circuit of the Americas. One thing to keep in mind down this back straightaway, the further left you go, if you happen to be racing, the more bumpy it gets. So you're going to want to stay off to the right side of the track here. As we get towards the braking zone for turn 12, hard on the brakes, threshold braking, hit peak pressure first, and then watch for that little dip as we get to the apex. There it is, hooks the front end, and then straddle the curbing on the exit. Getting the car over to the left as quickly as possible, and then nice mild brake pressure and leading the car down into this uphill turn 13. There's the hook that will bring the grip around to the front, and then straight lining. You see me driving off towards that Jumbotron on the right, and then trail braking down to a late apex here at turn 15. getting out to the curb on the exit and then moving off to the left. Again, you don't need to set up a ton in a slower car, but in a faster car, you definitely want to get off to the left side there, down to that apex, straddling turn 17 that you just saw, and then clinging to the inside curb, getting back off to the right side of the track. Now here is turn 19, a very light brake pressure. Watch how much inside curb you can take there. And then that allows you to not have to run nearly as wide off the exit of turn 19. And finally, a very straightforward braking and middle apex, uphill just slightly up onto the front straightaway to complete your lap at COTA. So we'll take one more look at the S's, and you can see here on entry, it is fairly blind, and I've turned in before that pedestrian bridge. Now I want you to take a note of the angle of the two different cars. The driver in front did not set up nearly as much for turn 4. You can see I'm almost faced an entire car width off to the left side, and that's going to give me more weight transfer to put the car into turn 4 and 5, which allows me to run this driver down in front of me. So again, aimed off towards those Jumbotrons, that has allowed me to carry more speed through 4, throwing the car through turn 5, and then tucking up to that first apex, and again straddling under that gantry there before you get to turn 7. Now the alternative option here into turn 7 would be to carry your speed all the way out and end up right to that right side of the track, then park the car and then straighten out turn 9. So those are my tips for COTA, and that brings us to our track scores. First up, we have our fun factor, and I'm going to give it a 7, partially because I would give half the lap a 10 and half the lap a 2. So I'm kind of averaging those two out. The first half of the lap, especially through the S's, so much fun. The flow through there is perfect. There's a reason Lewis Hamilton calls it his favorite section on the Formula One circuit globally. But the other half of the track can be a little tedious. There's a lot of straight lines. It's not nearly as much fun. So I would give it like a 50-50, average it to a 7. Next up, we have our risk factor. I'm going to give it a 1 on risk factor because most tracks, when you go off the track, even if there's nothing to hit, you're still hitting grass or gravel or something that can present a risk for you. Here at COTA, it's all paved. You have to do something ridiculous or have a big mechanical failure to find a wall or something hard here at COTA. But with all the paved runoff, I mean, there isn't a better track to go off at. Just maybe try not to. And finally, we have our technicality. And I'm actually going to give it an 8 on technicality because I feel like there's a lot of nuance here at COTA, and it's just such a long lap that actually executing the lap is hard in itself, let alone learning the nuances when you add in the different styles of corners, the different styles and sections, the bumps that have developed, all of those things come together and make COTA, especially in a bit of a faster car that maybe has street tires or no extra downforce, it's pretty tough to execute. So technicality an 8. So my overall score for COTA is going to be a 7, and I rank it up there with the iconic places that just have this ambiance. When you show up, you know that Formula One has raced there. You know it's this grand place, and any amount that you may feel lacking on certain sections of the track for being fun or challenging are still made up for with the experience of getting to go to COTA. So I'm going to give it a 7 overall. So that does it for COTA. We do offer coaching packages here at ASM, everything from remote coaching to trackside privately with you, and a whole lot more. So get a hold of us if you're interested in that. But otherwise, I hope you found that helpful, and thanks for watching.